Mr. Speaker, sir, Temasek's board had issued a carefully considered statement on the mutual decision that the board and Mr. Charles Goodyear had taken to terminate the leadership transition process at Temasek. It would not be appropriate for the government to add to the statement, bearing in mind that the government had no role in the decision of the board and the decision of the board and Mr. Goodyear not to continue with the CEO transition. Temasek informed the government of the decision before it was announced, but the government was not involved in any way in the decision. This does not mean that the government is a disinterested observer of Temasek's leadership succession. As shareholder of Temasek, the government has a clear interest in Temasek continuing to have strong leadership so that it can deliver good returns over the long term. However, the government does not directly manage the process of CEO succession. To do so would be to make the appointment of the CEO a political decision, which it must never be. The decision must remain the responsibility of the board of Temasek, which oversees the process of leadership succession and decides based on the merits and suitability of any CEO candidate. Temasek's board and current CEO, Ms. Ho Ching, had set about the process of CEO succession review since 2005, not because there was an urgent need to find a new CEO, but because a disciplined system of regular succession planning for its CEO and senior management is essential for Temasek's future as a professional organization. It was through this process that Temasek had found Mr. Goodyear to be a suitable CEO successor and made the offer for him to join Temasek. While it is obviously unfortunate that the board and Mr. Goodyear decided that the leadership transition should be terminated, Temasek intends to keep up its processes for CEO succession review and planning as part of board discipline. Temasek's leadership remains strong at both the CEO and the board level. They have enabled Temasek to sustain generally superior overall investment performance over the years, including over the last cycle in global markets that began in 2003. The board will continue to review succession options, and the government is confident that it will make its decision to appoint a successor CEO in the best interests of Temasek when a suitable CEO is available and ready. Thus, with regard to Mr. Seah Kan Ping's question, Temasek has no deadline for the search for a new CEO or for a CEO successor. Mr. Lim Biow Chuan and Mr. Seah Kan Ping had also asked if a severance bonus or golden handshake was offered to Mr. Goodyear. Temasek had no contractual obligation to make any compensation to Mr. Goodyear on separation. It was an amicable separation based on mutual agreement.
Mr. Lim.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. In the last PQ, which I asked a couple of months back, I asked the Minister why to pick the foreigner as the CEO for Temasek Holdings, considering that Temasek is a strategic asset and a fifth scheduled company under the Constitution. And the Minister had assured this House that the CEO shares Temasek's values and he's aligned with the long-term orientation of Temasek. May I just ask the Minister, how does this impact the government's evaluation of the Temasek's future recommendation regarding the assessment of the next CEO, considering that they had assured the Minister that this Mr. Goodyear shares Temasek's values and is aligned with the long-term orientation? Next question is whether would the government not think that a Singaporean CEO would be in a better position to share Temasek's values with respect to Singapore's, and that the local CEO would be more aligned with Temasek's long-term orientation?
I think Mr. Lim Biow Chuan was referring to the question which he had asked in March this year, which my colleague, Mrs. Lim Hui Hua, had answered. The question of whether the CEO of Temasek should be a Singaporean is not a trivial one. It is one which Cabinet considered very carefully and debated on before arriving at a decision. I would say that ideally we should have a Singaporean as a CEO. That's the ideal. And everything else being equal, when you look at two candidates who are equally suitable for the job, I think we should prefer to have a Singaporean. Temasek is not a typical company. It's a very large company and a rather complex one, as has happened over time, because it now is engaged in many regions geographically, many sectors, much broader in its sectoral reach than it used to be. And it is not just a steward of Singapore TLCs. So it has really been transformed very substantially over the years. So you really want someone as CEO, and you want enough people on the board with direct experience on managing global operations. Ideally, not just the operations of an investment company, but someone having operating experience. And quite frankly, the field at any point in time is always narrow, amongst Singaporeans as well as amongst foreigners. Even amongst foreigners, to find someone who's willing to come to Singapore and work for a Singapore government-related organization is not easy. So I would much prefer, and the government's position is that it would prefer not to restrict Temasek in its choice of CEO. The ideal is not always possible. What is critical is that the board remains in the control of Singaporeans. Chairman has to be Singaporean, deputy chairman Singaporean, majority of the board Singaporean, but we should allow for a few foreigners, and indeed we have at least one foreigner currently on the Temasek board. Let the board decide on who the best candidate is for CEO. The board knows our preferences, but it knows also that the government wants to ensure that Temasek gets the best person for the job each time it looks for a potential CEO successor. And we're not just talking about the current situation of the search in future for a CEO successor, but also the situation well down the road. This is about managing a complex, large investment organization, large in terms of its portfolio, in the best interests of Temasek and Singapore. We should not restrict their choices, and to restrict their choices would also be sending a signal, not just to Singaporeans, but more importantly to the countries in which Temasek invests in, that there's an element of political decision-making in the way Temasek is run. And we do not want to send that signal. So it's a fair question, and we have considered it very carefully within government. When the issue of Mr. Goodyear came up early in the year, that was the only issue we considered. The government didn't know Mr. Goodyear. We weren't responsible for nominating him, but we had to consider whether we were comfortable with Temasek appointing a foreigner. And we decided we should not restrict Temasek from appointing a foreigner. If the board's assessment was that Mr. Goodyear was suitable and ready, we were willing to put his name up to the President for concurrence. But the key issue which Cabinet deliberated on was whether we should allow for a foreigner. And it was not a trivial issue.
Mr. Lau.